Have you ever stood before a door? One that for years you simply couldn't open no matter how hard you tried. Some people are gifted, others are lucky. And then there are those who have only perseverance. This is the story of a young man who took the university entrance exam 10 times. Each year brought new hope. Each failure brought a long sigh. And the 10th time was the final one. You might think, who would be foolish enough to keep trying that long? But if you listen to this entire story, perhaps you'll see yourself in it. The part of you that gave up again and again just because of one failure. Today, let me take you into the quiet but deeply meaningful world of Elias Morton. An ordinary young man with a dream no one believed was worth anything anymore. The front door creaked open into the freezing morning light. Elias stepped out, walking with a gait familiar to everyone in his small Derbyshire town. He wore an old backpack, scuffed shoes, and a gray coat that hung too loosely on his shoulders. The wind played through his unkempt hair. The bus stop was as silent as it had been 10 years earlier. Elias stood there, alone. But in his mind was a long journey no one else could see. He was 29 years old. 8 failed attempts at the university exam due to psychological pressure. 1 year skipped entirely because his mother was hospitalized. And now, as he prepared for the 10th attempt, he called it the final one. Elias grew up in a working-class family. His mother worked as a janitor at a small hospital. His father used to be an electrical technician, until an accident left him permanently disabled. When Elias was 11, his younger brother was born prematurely and spent months in the NICU. Since then, Elias knew life didn't offer him any privileges, but he had one thing: quiet perseverance. The first time he took the exam, Elias chose to study education. He wanted to become a primary school teacher, like Mr. Riley, the one who once told him, "You have the eyes of someone who makes children feel safe." Result? He failed. The following year, failed again. It wasn't because he lacked knowledge. In fact, Elias was a solid student, especially in math and literature. But every time he entered the exam room, his body trembled, his chest tightened, and all his preparation collapsed like a sandcastle. One prep teacher even told him bluntly, "You don't need more tutoring. You need a therapist." But Elias didn't quit. He took on every kind of work: dishwashing, lifting cargo, yard work, just to save up for test prep courses each year. He had a notebook where he recorded every wrong answer, every spelling error, every time he failed to finish an essay on time. In the 5th year, his mother had to sell her wedding ring to pay for his prep school tuition. On the very day of the exam, she was hospitalized with acute heart failure. Elias chose to stay with her. He didn't tell anyone, but it's said that he sat silently outside the hospital gate all night. Year 6, he tried again. Failed. Year 7, he completed his prep, but caught whooping cough and didn't have the strength to finish the test. Year 8, his score was good enough for a vocational college, but Elias refused. He wasn't studying just to get into college. He was studying to become a teacher. Year 9, Elias came close to passing. For the first time, he cried, out of regret. In the small town, everyone knew of the strange young man. The local librarian even reserved a quiet desk for Elias on the 2nd floor, where the sun was soft, the wind calm, and the silence just right. Each morning, Elias would bring his notebook, pens, and some biscuits his mother baked. He would review lessons, take practice exams, and time himself with a small clock. No one reminded him. No one cheered him on. There was only one person who believed in him: Elias himself. This year was the 10th. Elias still arrived at the library on time, still worked through practice tests, but this time, he was quieter. He no longer wrote big motivational slogans. No more shouting, "You can do it." He simply scribbled one small line at the corner of his notebook. "One last time for myself." 2 days before the test, Elias fell off his bicycle and slightly dislocated his right wrist. At the clinic, the doctor asked, "College student?" "No," Elias replied. "10th year applicant." The room went silent. After getting bandaged up, Elias left the clinic, left arm hugging his books, right arm dangling in a sling, but there was no longer fear in his eyes. It seemed pain didn't surprise him anymore. Exam day. The sky over Derbyshire was overcast. A light drizzle filled the air. Elias wore a clean white shirt, his right wrist still wrapped in bandages. In his hand was the test slip. The same sheet he had held 9 times before, now printed for the 10th. He walked through the school gate. No one recognized him. But inside his heart, every gaze, every failed attempt, every quiet morning of studying, they all walked with him. In the exam room, the proctor's voice rang out, "Begin." Elias opened the test paper, placed his hand on the pen, and for the first time in 10 years, he wasn't afraid. No expectations, no pressure, just one final battle between Elias and Elias. If this quiet journey touched your heart, click like to support Quiet Strength, a channel that tells stories without shouting, but still strong enough to stir those who are exhausted. And if you believe there's still one more chance to begin again, hit subscribe, because tomorrow we'll continue with the rest of Elias's story. The exam lasted 3 days, and for all 3 days, rain fell non-stop across Derbyshire, the kind of gray, weary weather that could make someone give up halfway if they lacked the will to persist. Day 1. Literature. Elias sat at desk number 28 in the far left corner. The exam room brought back memories of all the times he'd been so afraid he lost sight of himself. But this time, his left hand wrote with calm steadiness. His bandaged right hand rested lightly on the desk, occasionally shifting to keep the paper from fluttering in the draft. Though writing with his non-dominant hand, Elias was well prepared. He had spent months training to write with his left hand on days when his old wrist injury flared up. Question 3 was a social essay topic. Repeated failure, a sign of futility or of perseverance? He stared at the prompt for a long while, then began to write. No flourish, no drama. Elias wrote as if he were having a quiet conversation with himself. He wrote of an oak tree chopped down 9 times but sprouting again on the 10th. Of a janitor who practiced violin in a small room for 12 years. Of his mother, the woman who had packed him exam biscuits 10 times without once complaining. The proctor passed by and unconsciously paused beside him a few seconds longer than usual. Day 2. Mathematics. A subject Elias once loved, then came to fear. The exam was difficult. Algebra sections filled with transformations, geometry problems that demanded strong spatial reasoning. Many students chewed pens, crossed things outside, and stared at the clock. Elias stayed silent. Even when unsure, he tackled each question like someone walking a familiar road. Every stone counted, every step deliberate. Not fast, but steady. With 15 minutes left, the rain poured heavier. The sound of raindrops on the tin roof became a rhythmic hum, like a ticking clock. Then came a tough question, the last one, in the advanced section. Elias hesitated. He looked up at the ceiling, then at his own hand. Bony fingers, calloused knuckles, old ink stains. And he wrote. He didn't know if it was correct, but he didn't leave it blank. Final day. Social sciences. The air was freezing. Elias brought a hand warmer his mother had bought last winter. He sat through 3 subjects, from morning to late afternoon, exhausted. But he didn't let go. Like a climber, with aching legs and numb fingers, who still presses forward because the summit is near. That final afternoon, Elias stepped out of the school gates. Other test takers hugged and laughed, saying, "We're done. See you in college." Elias simply stood there. He looked up and saw, for the first time in 3 days, a break in the clouds. A soft sunlight peeking through. He sat down on a stone bench across from the school. Backpack on his back, arms hugging his knees, he lowered his head for a long moment. Then, he looked up and smiled. Not because he knew he had succeeded, but because, on the 10th attempt, he had not given up. The weeks of waiting were quiet. Elias returned to the library, not to prepare for tests, but simply to read. Books he had avoided for the past 10 years, afraid they'd distract him. Novels, children's stories, gardening guides, celebrity memoirs. Each book made him feel like a part of him was coming back to life. He helped his mother bake, cleaned the old room, washed dusty cups, taped together pages from worn-out notebooks. He didn't talk much about the exam. When the neighbor asked, "Do you feel confident this time?" Elias just smiled. "This time, I feel at peace." The morning the results were released, Elias woke up at 5 a.m. He didn't turn on the computer right away. Instead, he brewed tea, poured it into an old mug printed with an oak tree, a birthday gift from his mother 3 years ago. He ate breakfast, wiped the table, and opened the window to let the sunlight in. It wasn't until 6:30 that he sat down at the desk. Entered his exam ID. The site loaded slowly. The internet lagged. 1 minute, 2, 3, and then the results appeared. Name: Elias Morton, First Choice University. University of Education. London status: passed. No bold fonts, no flashing effects. Just a single plain line. But it made Elias's eyes sting with heat. His mother walked in. She saw Elias sitting still, hand resting on the mouse. She asked softly, "What is it, dear?" Elias turned to her. "Mom, I passed." She stared at him for a few seconds, then burst into tears. And for the first time in years, Elias cried aloud too. He cried from joy, but even more, from relief. He cried because he didn't give up, even though he had 100 reasons to. The news that Elias had passed spread quietly through the small town. The librarian, the cafe owner, the train station guard. Everyone heard and everyone smiled. No one said much, but something inside each of them felt a little warmer, because they had seen someone just like them. Ordinary, awkward, but endlessly persistent. Finally win. 3 months after receiving his results, Elias stepped onto the platform at London Station with an old fabric suitcase, a backpack slung over his shoulder, and a fresh student ID card still smelling of ink. He had been accepted into the University of Education in London, majoring in primary education. The school dormitory was nestled in a quiet neighborhood, about a 10-minute walk from the central library. Elias was assigned a third-floor room shared with 2 other students, Leo, an 18-year-old aspiring novelist, and Marcus, the son of a high school teacher from Brighton. From the very first day, Elias stood out, not because of his age, but because of how he noticed things. While his roommates were busy decorating walls with posters of rock bands, he quietly wiped down the desk, folded his clothes, and taped a small note beside his study corner. "Everyone arrives here from a different path. Respect the road that brought you." On orientation day, Elias wore a white shirt and a soft brown wool cardigan. He sat quietly in the back row as the professor called the roll for first-year students. "Elias Morton? Present, sir." His deep, composed voice made several heads turn. No one expected a freshman to sound so weathered. Classes quickly became intense. Theory in the mornings, classroom simulations in the afternoons, and weekend internships. At a nearby elementary school, Elias never complained. To him, every lesson was a gift. He took notes by hand, never used a voice recorder. "Writing helps me remember better," he once said. Professors soon noticed he was different, not exceptionally brilliant, but always patient, observant, and quietly focused. During a group discussion, a lecturer asked, "What's the hardest part about teaching young children?" Students gave answers: short attention spans, low salaries, difficult parents, lack of patience. Elias simply said, "The hardest part is not letting a child believe they are a failure." The room went quiet for a moment. The lecturer nodded slowly. "That answer makes me want to revisit some of my old lectures." By the second month, Elias started a part-time cleaning job for a family near campus. Mornings were for classes, afternoons for training, evenings for work, late nights for reading. No one forced him, but no one quite understood why he chose to exhaust himself like that. One night, Leo asked, "Aren't you tired? I mean, you're older. Shouldn't you take it easier?" Elias smiled gently. "I'm not studying for a diploma. I'm studying because it took me 10 years to earn the right to be here." One required course in first year was storytelling skills for children. Each student had to stand in front of a simulated class, read aloud a children's book, and interact as if teaching a real group. When it was Elias's turn, the class was surprised. He chose a simple book, The Last Leaf, by O. Henry, not exactly written for kids, but Elias believed, children understand more than we think. He didn't perform theatrically. He read slowly, like he was reading to his younger self, back when he sat beside his mother on the bed, dreaming of becoming a teacher. He paused at the right sentences, looked up and asked, "Do you understand why that last leaf mattered so much?" When he finished, the classroom was silent. The elderly lecturer walked over, gently placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You don't just have a voice for storytelling. You have a voice that makes people feel." One chilly Saturday afternoon, Elias walked home from his part-time job. The autumn air was crisp. He stopped by a small used bookstore and picked up a book on voice training for teachers. He stepped outside. He paused at the shop's glass window, and for the first time in a long time, Elias really looked at himself. No longer the anxious 19-year-old who trembled in exam rooms. No longer the boy who failed. So often people stopped remembering his name. Now, he was a student, a future teacher, someone who had survived his own fear. By mid-November, the university arranged its first internship at a local elementary school in the south of the city. Elias was assigned to Class 2C, known as one of the rowdiest groups. His supervising teacher was Miss Rowley, a woman in her 40s, strict and reputed to be difficult. When she heard Elias was the oldest intern, she asked, "I heard it took you 10 years to get into university?" "Yes, ma'am." "And now you want to teach primary school?" "I don't just want to, I'm sure." Miss Rowley smiled, for the first time in that meeting. "Good. Then start by getting my class to listen to you for 5 minutes." On his first day, Elias stood in front of 28 7-year-olds. One of them asked bluntly, "Why do you look so old?" The whole class burst into laughter. But Elias wasn't flustered. He knelt down, smiled, and replied, "Because I've failed many times. But I'm standing here now, because I believe every one of you is worth the effort." The class fell silent, and Miss Rowley, standing behind him, gave a small nod. Elias wasn't the top student in his teaching cohort, but he was the only one who never missed a class, never asked for leave, and always helped others without being asked. More and more students started calling him Mr. Elias. Not because he was older, but because everyone knew Elias had already lived like a teacher, long before he ever became one. In his second year of university, Elias Morton entered a new phase. Less bewildered, but no less challenged. Classes were heavier, internship pressure mounting, and every so often that quiet fear returned. Will I ever be good enough? Still, Elias kept his old habits, waking at 5:30 a.m., reading for an hour before class, and writing a short journal entry every night to reflect on what he'd learned that day. That journal would later be nicknamed by his classmates as the Calm Teacher's Book. No one had ever seen Elias lose his temper. No one had ever heard him complain. But that didn't mean things were easy. At the start of the second semester, Elias received a phone call from his hometown. His mother's heart condition had worsened. The doctor's voice was clear. She needs surgery, and time is running out. The cost was significant. Elias had no insurance coverage for her in the city. He had taken on extra jobs, but his savings still weren't enough. For a week, he went to class with a storm inside his head. A quiet, unresolved battle. Should I pause school to care for her, or keep studying, hoping that graduating would let me help her more in the long run? One afternoon, Elias skipped a class and boarded a train back home. He watched people blur past the window. Everything outside, and within, felt foggy. 10 years of effort to sit in a university classroom, and now all he wanted was to leave it all and sit beside his mother. At the hospital, he stayed by her bedside all night. Her hands were thinner, her voice weaker, but her eyes, warm and trusting, were still the same. "Mom, maybe I should take a year off." "No." She shook her head gently. "If you do that, I'll feel like a burden. I've seen how strong you are. Don't stop now, just because I'm getting weaker." Elias lowered his head, gripping his hands to hide the tear that slipped out. "I'm just afraid that you won't be here to see me stand in front of a classroom one day." She smiled faintly. "If that day comes, then teach like I'm still listening." Elias returned to London. He didn't drop out. Instead, he picked up a night shift, cleaning an office building after classes. Every night, after clocking out, at 1 a.m., he walked back to the dorm with a cup of hot tea, softly whispering the next day's lesson under his breath. From the outside, it looked like Elias was pushing himself too hard, but only he knew. The fear of losing his mother had become fuel, driving him to live twice as hard, try 3 times as much. In May, Elias was selected for a long-term internship at Greenwood Primary, the school with the highest number of autistic and neurodivergent children in the district. Few students volunteered for it. It was high pressure, emotionally demanding, and required advanced skills. Elias didn't hesitate. He was assigned to Class 1B, helping a small group of 3 children with speech and language challenges. The toughest case was a boy named Henry, almost nonverbal, prone to anger, often throwing objects. On the first day, Henry spilled a full box of crayons onto Elias's shoes. Most interns would have backed away or alerted the main teacher. But Elias simply knelt down. No yelling, no scolding. He quietly picked up each crayon, then handed one back to Henry. "This one's the same color as your hair. Dark yellow, like autumn sunlight." Henry said nothing, but for the first time, he didn't run away. For the next several weeks, Elias arrived 20 minutes early every day. He arranged the chairs, prepared a separate board for his small group, and handwrote simple language cards to help Henry with communication. He didn't expect a miracle. He just hoped that maybe one day, Henry might say one word more. Or maybe just smile. And then it happened. Slowly. The way everything in Elias's life did. One morning, Henry stood at Elias's desk and handed him a piece of paper. A messy drawing of a figure with curly hair. Underneath, in shaky letters, it said, "You are like the sun." Elias froze. Not because of the picture, but because it was the first full sentence Henry had ever written. No prompting, no reward, no assignment, just something he wanted to say. On the final day of the internship, Miss Rowley dropped by for a visit. She saw Henry sitting calmly beside Elias, quietly sketching. She smiled. "I once told you to find a way to make the children listen. Now, they don't just listen, they trust you." At the end of the semester, Elias returned home. His mother's surgery had been successful. Though her health was fragile, she never failed to ask, "How's your class doing?" One of them called me the sun. "Yes, because you shine in the quietest way." When he returned to campus, Elias was invited to be a guest teaching assistant for the course Special Education Methods, even though he was still only in his second year. he was asked to mentor the new first-year students, to share what it was like teaching children who didn't fit the mold. During one sharing session, a nervous student asked, "Have you ever thought of giving up on this profession?" Elias looked at him for a moment, then shook his head. "I once thought of giving up the exam, but I never thought of giving up the dream." Elias wasn't the top student in his class, but his story began to quietly circulate around campus, like a soft breeze, unspoken, unpretentious. He became living proof of one simple truth: the best teachers don't need to stand above their students. They just need to kneel low enough to reach their hearts. In his final year of university, Elias Morton had come to be known by a more familiar name: Mr. Elias. No longer the quiet student scribbling notes in the back row, Elias was now a teaching assistant, a group mentor, and the older peer that first-year students sought out in moments of confusion. He had nothing more than they did, except for the experience of breaking, mending, and never missing a day moving forward. The final semester began with the longest internship of all, 12 full weeks of teaching in a public primary school on the southern outskirts of London. Hawthorne Primary was unique. It sat at the intersection of two contrasting neighborhoods. One, a row of elegant old homes, the other, a dense working-class housing block. Elias was assigned to Class 3D, a class of 24 students, 1/3 of whom came from disadvantaged, immigrant or broken families. On his first day, the principal pulled Elias aside and said, "This won't be an easy class. You'll face resistance. Some parents might question you. You're still too young. But I chose you because I heard you stood up after 10 failures. Kids need to see people like that." Elias began with something simple: the seating chart. Instead of arranging desks by test scores, he mixed higher-performing students with struggling ones. He didn't grade with red ink. Instead, he used leaf-shaped stickers, each one not for a score, but for effort. On the whiteboard, he wrote, "You don't need to be better than others. You only need to be different from who you were yesterday." One of his students was a boy named Omar, 9 years old, from Syria. He had lived in a refugee camp for 2 years before coming to the UK. He rarely spoke, flinched at loud noises, and startled when people moved too quickly near him. Previous teachers had tried to pull Omar out of his shell. None had succeeded. Elias took a different route. Instead of forcing Omar to speak, he slipped a note into his desk mailbox each morning. "The weather is nice today. What would you like to draw? If you could have any animal as your best friend, what would it be? I'm telling a story with pictures today. Want to sit by the window?" Omar didn't respond at first. But in the 3rd week, he left behind a piece of paper, a drawing of an owl with a short sentence underneath. "Owls don't talk, but owls see well." That night, Elias brought the note home and pinned it beside his desk, right next to a letter his mother had written during his 10th year of exams. Class 3D slowly became one of the most tightly knit groups in the school. Not because of grades, but because every student felt seen. Elias introduced 10 minutes of silence every Monday morning. The class would listen to soft instrumental music, then quietly write one line. "This week, I'm thankful for," one student wrote. "Thanks for not calling me to the board when I was about to cry." Another, "Thanks for letting me sit next to my new friend." And another, quietly, "Thanks for believing in me, even when my parents didn't." In the 8th week of the internship, Elias received devastating news. His mother's heart condition had returned. This time, it was serious. She was hospitalized immediately. Elias requested 3 days off. He returned home and sat by her bedside, just as he had years before. She was visibly weaker, spoke less, and breathed with difficulty. Elias held her hand and whispered, "Don't worry, Mom. My class is okay." She gave a small, soft smile. "Don't stop. Don't become someone who quits just because it hurts." He would remember that line for the rest of his life. Back in the classroom, Elias said nothing. but the children could tell something had changed. Omar quietly approached, gently placed his hand over Elias's, and said, softly, but clearly, "The owl still sees. The owl hasn't flown away." Elias almost cried, not because of the words, but because he realized something profound. Those who have known deep loneliness are often the ones who comfort best. In the final week of the internship, the class had a special lesson. Each student was invited to tell a short story. Not mandatory, yet every student volunteered. Omar went last. He held a folded sheet of paper. Before, I didn't speak. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I wasn't sure anyone would listen. He looked at Elias. "Now I know. There's someone who hears me, even when I say nothing." Elias didn't look away. In that moment, the 10 years of failure, the 1 a.m. janitor shifts, every night of self-doubt. It all made sense. On the final day, an evaluator visited the class. It was just a regular math lesson, nothing dramatic. But the classroom felt like a hearth, quiet, warm, alive. After class, the evaluator wrote one sentence in the assessment. "This is not a student teacher. This is a teacher who already belongs in the classroom." When the year ended, the university offered Elias a position as a teaching assistant for the incoming cohort. A professor pulled him aside and said, "You don't need to apply. We've been watching you since your first year." Elias said little. He simply bowed his head. Inside, he whispered a quiet, "Thank you." Not to the school, but to the 19-year-old boy he once was. The one who didn't let go, even when all he had left was one finger holding on. It was a cool September morning, with soft golden sunlight. Elias Morton stepped through the iron gates of Hawthorne Primary School. This time, no longer as an intern, but as a full-time teacher. The classroom for grade 2B had been freshly painted. On the blackboard, written neatly in white chalk, was the name, Mr. Morton. The air still carried the scent of new notebooks, and the plastic chairs were lined up in perfect rows. Everything felt like a dream. Elias stood in front of the board for a long while. No one else was in the room. But he smiled, nodding gently, as if bowing to an invisible crowd. The years of failure, the nights his mother waited up after exams, the children who once believed in him even when he didn't. His class had 26 students, each child a small mosaic tile, carrying with them a family, a past, an unanswered question. Elias placed name tags on each desk, not in alphabetical order, but following the pattern of morning sunlight through the windows, so every child could receive the first light of the day in their own way. On the first day of school, Elias didn't give a formal speech. Instead, he told a short story. The boy who fixed the same door 27 times. There was no magic in it, just an old door, a small patient boy, and the moment it finally opened, right when it mattered most. One student asked, "What if you fix it 28 times and it still doesn't work?" Elias crouched down, smiled, and said, "Then the 29th time, you already know one more way not to do it. And that means you're still moving forward." One day while teaching, Elias received a phone call from the hospital in his hometown. His mother had been admitted again, this time more seriously. Her heart condition had begun to affect her kidneys. The principal suggested he take time off, but Elias only asked for 3 days over the weekend and caught the earliest train home. She lay in bed, frailer than before, her eyes half closed. Elias held her hand all night. In the morning, she opened her eyes and spoke in a whisper. "Are you still teaching?" "Yes, every day." "Good. Some children just need one kind teacher to change their whole lives." That was the last time Elias heard her voice. The funeral was simple. Not many guests. But when Elias returned to London, dozens of small condolence letters from his students were waiting. One of them read, "I don't know your mom, but I'm sure she was good, because she raised someone like you." Elias taped that letter to the inside cover of the journal he'd used throughout university. Below it, he wrote, "Mom never needed to see me at the front of a classroom, because she was the very first podium I ever stood on." A year later, Elias was invited to a regional ceremony honoring teachers who inspire, not because his class had the highest scores, but because it had the highest rate of emotional and behavioral growth in the entire school. The ceremony was held in a small hall. When Elias stepped on stage, he carried no notes. He spoke slowly. "I failed the university entrance exam 10 times. Some said I was stubborn. Others said I was wasting my time. But today, I'm here to say, no effort is ever wasted if it's born from the desire to become a better version of yourself." The hall applauded, but Elias didn't smile. He simply bowed his head. In his heart, he gave thanks to the 9 times he had failed, the stumbles that had shaped his steady stance today. Years later, Elias became a regional teaching advisor, but he kept one unchanging habit. Every Thursday evening, before going home, he'd stand alone in his classroom and write one quiet sentence on the board for next week's students. One day, a young teacher passing by noticed the words, "Perseverance isn't about never feeling tired. It's about knowing why you're not allowed to stop." The boy from long ago, Omar, also became a teacher. On graduation day, he sent Elias a message. "You were the first person who saw me as a human being, not a case study. I became a teacher because if I can make a silent child smile, I know you'd be proud." Elias read the message that night, then quietly wrote the last line in that same journal, the final words of one chapter in his life. "I opened the door, not with a key, but with hands hardened by perseverance." Some people reach their dreams on the first try, some on the third, and some, like Elias, knock 10 times, with bloodied hands and a heart that almost gave out. But those people, when they break through their invisible wall, they don't just open the door for themselves. They open it for many others. Elias was not extraordinary. He was proof of one quiet truth. As long as you don't give up, the road hasn't ended. So if you are lost right now, standing before your 2nd, 3rd, or 10th attempt, remember, no try is ever meaningless, as long as you can still rise. And sometimes, the most remarkable thing you can do is simply continue.